Okay, folks, they're finishing up putting a map, but I think we'll get started. It's a little after 10. That Sue Miller's always talking. I don't know.
Oh, Sue Miller.
Sue Miller is here. Welcome to the July. Sue Miller's always talking. What are we going to do? I'm just messing with you. Welcome to the July. Welcome to the July meeting. We'll get started. We are missing Mary Jane Brown today, who I think we've finally driven her over the edge and she's gone off to vacation in Colorado for the week, but we'll give her that break. But she will be missed. I will not dilly-dally. We have a lot of information to share today. I do want to make one adjustment with the board's blessing to the agenda, and that is I'd like to move item 4, which is the second reading of the 2019 budget discussion, to after item 6, which is the strategic planning committee update. It will make more sense to you if you hear the committee update first. Is that all right with everybody? Okay.
Fine.
Very well. With all that being said, how about the minutes? Has everyone had a chance to review?
I move for approval of the June 23 board minutes as presented.
Thank you.
I can second that.
Thank you, Debbie. It's been moved and seconded that we approve June 23rd board meeting minutes. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Treasurer's report, Mr. Blackwell.
Okay, that's fine. I'll do
Yes.
the treasurer's report.
Correct.
We had 205,040.91 income. So we got our taxes. We got our Monroe and Brown County taxes last month. We had $75,627 in expenses with a net income of $129,413. Everyone's got a record of their reported claims, so I will accept a motion to approve the reported claims.
I'll make that motion
for June.
Mr. Blackwell.
Thank you.
I'll second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor, signify by saying aye, please.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Did you want to discuss the CD renewal
Yes,
now?
we do have a CD renewal, $5,000 for the cumulative maintenance fund. We always put the $5,000 when we receive it into the cumulative maintenance fund CD, and I would,
And how much is that CD?
5,000. Oh, how much is that CD? That would be in last month's balance sheet.
12,978.
Thank you.
12,978, yes.
Which would increase it to 17,000, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so that would increase that cumulative maintenance fund CD to $17,000. Any more discussion on putting the $5,000 cumulative maintenance fund into the cumulative
Well, we'll need
maintenance?
a motion with the term as well. So we have the 18-month term at 2.05% and a 2-year term at 2.1. So we're moving out of the ones.
Yeah. What is the recommendation?
I would recommend that we go for a shorter term. I think the interest rates will keep going up. And then we can put that 5,000 and that could be potentially available sooner.
So, is a money market an alternative instead of having it in a CD? I mean, like I feel like IB Credit Union, I mean, I don't know, but they seem to be pretty good on like money market rates. And anyway, I would think about that, you know, it's a pretty small amount.
Yeah, I mean, that'd be
Makes it more flexible.
definitely something we could look into.
It's a good suggestion, Don.
Do we want to table that till next month and look at,
I'm fine with putting the 5,000 and voting that it goes in. I think somebody just needs to look at where it should be.
Yeah, I mean, the term is up now.
Since
so
you
we're
want
within
it
the
short
grace
term.
period.
Yeah. Okay. I can live with that.
okay, so we'll put the $5,000 into the cumulative maintenance fund CD right now, and as far as renewing the CD, we'll put that on hold?
Or what we
Or
could,
you'll make a decision? Can we just let
What-
our manager make a decision?
what we could do is delegate that either the 18-month CD or an alternative funding source of equal security
Right.
that has a rate of at least 2.05%.
Or greater, right.
Okay.
Right, very good. I like that. Care to
And
make
when
that?
you said a shorter term, Adam, what did you mean? Did you
Well, I just
mean
meant like
18
an
months?
18-month versus a 3 to 4 year.
Okay.
So that was my motion.
Very well. I'll second that motion. So it's been moved and seconded.
Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. We do have a question from the floor. I'm not sure if you want to take any
I'm
questions.
taking public comment or questions at the end of
Just
the
a real
meeting.
quick one. I just got a Super Singer CD for over 3 points.
Okay, thanks. All right.
So it's out there.
Okay, thank you.
I'll talk to you about that, Terry, afterwards. Thank you, sir. Okay, Madam Chair, that
End your
concludes.
report. Okay, very well. All right, manager's report, Adam?
Didn't have time to warm up, all right.
Sir.
I'm gonna stand up so we have a big map over here. And we handed out maps, there's colored maps on the table of all the different alternatives that we're looking at, as well as our initial draft report from Shrewsbury with the different areas that we're looking at as far as a proposed path, as far as project developments for first, second, third stages as we move on. So this is really the first time, unless you've been attending the strategic planning committee meetings, that a lot of you have seen this map, which encompasses all of the different elements that we're looking at for the sedimentation project. And what I'll kind of do is, I'll work through the map initially, and then we'll look at the recommendations and the packages that Shrewsbury has presented, and that the SPC is going to recommend that we follow. So everybody on your maps, this is Reed Point and Point Eidolon. I'm sure most people are familiar with the areas. Well, the goal of this project, aside from just dredging and increasing this Eastern Bay's depth to safer boating area, one of the main goals is how can we reduce the sediment loading that's coming into the lake proper, into the bay, and how we can consolidate where it's affecting to actually make our operation more efficient. So as we move from east to west, since the goal is to trap as much sediment as we can east, we'll work from that way and then look at these different elements. On the eastern side of your map, we have elements 23 and 22, and these are potential areas for sedimentation ponds, which would mean we would actually open up an area, dig out a pond, and have a space where water could flow in and have time to settle out at high flows of volume. Now, all these are not going to necessarily be done. They're just all potential options. These two ones actually in particular we're looking to maybe not be as cost effective as some of the other measures. So while these are different alternatives and implementation measures that we can do, we're not guaranteed to use all of these. It's just kind of an overarching map, and we'll select what we feel is going to get us the biggest bang for the buck as we move forward. Now, kind of getting into one of my favorite areas is these items number 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. And what we're actually looking at here is we have a very nice wetland that's already forming there. And the benefit of the wetlands is it filters out water, takes up nutrients, and it really slows down the flow of the water, which allows sediment to fall out. Currently, these pathways are all completely blocked off, so 100% of the flow coming down Bean Blossom Creek, which means 100% of the sediment in these high flow waters are shooting straight into this eastern bay. And anybody that boats down here knows there's that delta forming that we have marked off where it is incredibly shallow. I can't even go in my pontoon with the boat down across that area without bottoming out. So what we're looking at doing is filtering out as much of that sediment and slowing down the velocity of that flow so we can reduce the force and erosion on the bottom side as much as possible. So these channels up here are old stream channels that were stream channels before. They've since filled in and the stream is diverted going down the main creek. But what these could potentially do if we open them up is allow a broader network of pathways for the water to flow. So during these high flow events that we get, we can actually direct using stream diversion and by opening the channels, the flow of water into this wetland network here, which essentially could be a filtration cell and a sediment storage bank. On your maps, you can see the forest areas and then darker areas in between the forests. And those are all wetlands now, which are primarily spatter dock, which is that low-growing leafy plant that you'll see kind of on the eastern end on the creeks, and actually little coves around the lake, which is a very low functioning wetland. So what we're going to do is we're going to promote the sediment going into these areas. So we'll promote the growth of these wetlands from what's called an emergent wetland, just a spatter dot, into shrubs and then eventually forested wetland, which is essentially going to be locking that sediment in place. And then these diversion structures that we would have along these can further push the flow at heavy flows into these areas to try to lock it. The good thing about this is we can actually do the channel work with our current dredge. We have what's called a nationwide permit right now for one-step removal. One-step removal is the mechanical dredging that we currently do for access dredging, where we essentially scoop the dirt up, nothing goes back in, and then we set it in an upland storage site. So under our current permit, we can actually go through and open up these channels considered normal maintenance. What I think we would want to do if we implement this stage one would be to hire outside companies just for expediency, where we could use that money and we could get more barges, and then we could potentially knock that out, I think, in a year's worth of work. We're looking at about 43,000 cubic yards of sediment in these channels here total, which if we cleared out, and actually in these cost proposals, we factored in there clearing out our east end disposal site. I believe we could actually, if we clear that out, we could fit this sediment into that disposal site, which would give us a drying area and then potentially truck it out after that outside of the basin. What we will have to do for permitting is after we open up these channels, if we start putting in diversion structures to help the water flow into these channels even more, just open them, we'll give them a pathway at high flow. Then we can use diversion structures to further help the sediment-laden water come in to these wetland cells right here. Once we start getting to diversion structures, we will have to look at permitting there. Anytime we put fill or material into the waterway, it does have to be permitted. With our initial discussions with Army Corps of Engineers, they did not see a reason why that would not be able to be permitted, and that why it wasn't a good idea. And then on our map, so this is what we're looking at as phase one in the Shrewsbury report, which they say open flow paths. So as we're looking around at opening these flow paths, and we're looking at the different costs, this is actually essentially $1 million project, which includes contingency. And that $1 million would be contracting out for dredgers to come in and do this, removing the sediment from our disposal site so we can open that up so we have a place to deposit the sediment. So this is where we're kind of looking at the phase one if we were to implement this, and it goes right along with that $1 million which we could potentially receive from bonding. But I believe, and Shrewsbury believes, that this is going to be the biggest benefit to us, because it's going to slow down the sediment coming into the lake, and it's going to consolidate the areas of impact. So some of the questions that we have been getting are, is it going to increase the wetlands there? Yes, it is. Is it going to increase the amount of forest there? Yes, it is. But while we're increasing the wetlands and the forest, we're consolidating where that is happening at versus letting nature take its course and then the wetlands and forest pushing into the bay. So this is phase one that we're looking at. Phase two is when we start getting into the dredging. And as a timeline, phase one can be knocked out pretty quick. As we move on to phase two and phase three, I believe it says in the report years 2020 and 2021 and so on. That's a very aggressive timeline. So we're not going to say, we're absolutely going to implement phase one, jump into phase two in 2 years. We'll have to look at raising money, if we can find grants, letting our foundations that we've created bring in some money. I don't think it'd be wise to try to take all of us on at once and burden ourselves with bonding or debt that we'll be paying out forever. So the implementation timeline can be skewed, but what this really does is give us a guideline for moving forward as we want to pick these different elements or these different phases to initiate them. So phase one on here was a recommendation to start first, because it'll do the most to reduce the amount of sediment coming in and consolidating it. is the 6 through 10 right here, essentially opening up the old wetlands and stream beds and what I call wetland corridors. And anybody who goes up the creek after the entrance to Chitwood on the left, you can actually see this number 10 wetland corridor where water used to flow there. Now you'll see deer running across it and animals playing there. So then as we move to phase 2 is when we actually start getting into the dredging. When we are open dredging, the most efficient way is not the mechanical that we utilize for channel access right now, but it's actually hydraulic dredging. And we've looked at this in the past and we haven't done it, but essentially what hydraulic dredging is it looks like a snow blower, but on a large scale, you have an auger head on the front, and it cuts up the sediment, and it pumps the sediment and water through piping to a disposal site. And it's hydraulic because it's 90% water as you're pumping it. But the efficiency rates are almost tenfold. Why on a very good year, we could get about 10,000 cubic yards dug out by current equipment. It is no problem for one of these large hydraulic dredges to come in and move 100,000 yards in a single season. If you're getting to those amounts, and it does cost money, so it's going to be something that has to be factored in as we start to get into the dredging, and then we'll get into that as we go along. The first part of dredging that we're looking at is this number 1, the 17.3 acres, and that's where that delta is forming, coming right past Ellis Point, which is really a safety hazard that anybody that utilizes the lake, whether it's skiing, tubing, boating in general in that area. And the way that we broke this down is we have to get very crafty with our sediment disposal, since we don't have lots of farmlands around, not any really big open areas that we can put it in. So we're looking at different types of disposal, such as in-lake disposal. This item number 12 is something that's been talked about before with the KCI report last year, which is essentially creating a berm or a battle wall that we're going to say, this is where we're going to try to hold the advancement of this wetland and delta to, and then west of this, we'll try to maintain the deep water. So the way this is broken out is if we were to go in and dredge this area number 1 5 foot, this number 12 would essentially hold that same amount of sediment. So we could have storage, and what this 12 is, to create this wall or this barrier from the advancement, is they have what's called geo bags, and it looks like burlap sack essentially, but it's made out of different types of plastics, biodegradable or non-biodegradable, but they're very friendly, and they don't leak BPAs or chemicals. They've got the technology there. And what actually happens is you would pump from the hydraulic dredge into these bags, and as these bags dry in deep water, you can then reinforce them, whether you want to use riprap, whether you want to use natural planes. Potentially this could be made into a walkway or an area where you can fish off of, the boat too. I think it'd be real cool to put a bridge off Little Africa and then have a little nature walkway over there. And as we're looking at doing this for in-lake disposal, probably one of the easiest ways to do this would be if we did about a 2-foot drawdown, which would really expose this entire bay right here, even at 2 feet. And what that would allow us to do is hydraulically dredge in the bay here, pump into these bags, and then still allow it to deep water right back into the lake. So that's really the phase 2 that we get into, is that element number, he has 2, 3, night, it's like jumped on to phase 3. Phase 2, the elements 1 and 12. And as we get into that, the cost of hydraulic dredging is a decent amount, and they're estimating that at $1,900,000. And I mean, that we don't have to take all this on at once. We're going to be trying to raise the money. We're going to look at different funding sources, and again, this will be implemented throughout time as we see fit. But the idea and the goal is to have a plan of action that we can follow through as possible. As again, the areas 2, 3, 4, and 5, we have to look at even more disposal sites, potentially off the lake, and then some other ones that we're looking at. There's some different farmlands around which we would actually have to look at an acquisition. But we do have these numbers 17 and 18 which could potentially be disposal sites. 17 would be potentially widening out the causeway, using some dirt there so we could actually reinforce that and widen it, maybe create some parking. But that's falling in anyways. And then 18 is a potential disposal site on the south side of the causeway. And one of the ideal locations about that, and I know there's some homes right around there and some people that utilize it. So on this, we've actually kept a decent sized area, 3 to 4 acres on that eastern side, so it can still be swam in and it can be used for recreation by homeowners. But one of the ideal things here is every year after July and August, that area gets choked out with blue-green algae. We're already halfway to the threshold for body contact in that area. We've already got blue-green algae species known as Cylindrospermopsis that's already at 50,000 units per milliliter. 100,000 is the threshold, so we're well on our way to Dean there. So if we move dirt in here, what we would be able to do is actually create wetlands in this area that we have hashed off. And so that gives us benefits on many different levels. First, what it does is it gives us sediment storage. 2, we could potentially build a wetland there. And by building wetlands, essentially what we would look at is starting on the west end about a foot above water, and as we move to the right, you taper down to about a foot below water, so you can have a transition from forest to shrubs and then emergent wetland, lotus and scatterdock and different types of plants. So that wetland there would be good for water quality. It would take up the nutrients, so it would really pretty much stop blue-green algae blooms in that area because you wouldn't have an excess of nutrients. And what it allows us to do is potentially use that area for mitigation. As we look at dredging or opening up channels, if we impact other wetlands, we have to mitigate for those damages. The threshold is a 1/10 of an acre, so if we impact more than a 1/10 of an acre of a wetland, we have to start mitigating that. And one of the lowest ratios is a 2 to 1. So if we impact an acre of wetland, we have to mitigate by either creating or paying into a fund 2 acres. And that gets very expensive. That's in the range of 70 to 80,000 per acre if we were to pay in lieu of creating a wetland. So what this would really allow us to do is mitigate on our own property, enhance water quality, and potentially we can sell off these different wetland acres as credits to other people that need mitigation, such as the I-69 projects, other different highway projects, really anybody that's impacting. You can actually, what they say, is bank the acreage of created wetland and sell off, potentially use that as a revenue generating source as well. So we're really trying to get crafty as far as the storage, and then how we can generate revenue and reduce our own impacts as well and mitigate on site. Number 17, again, we're looking at potentially widening out South Shore. This is like a very costly option. And again, all these are just potentials now. Not everything is guaranteed. We can select as we move forward. As we get further into the phases, we'll be looking at dredging areas 2, 3, and 4. I think 1 and 2 are kind of one of the highest priorities as far as utilization from all the residents and the public at hand. But as we move forward, then we'll look at moving into these different areas for dredging. I'm trying to get some of the other major stuff on here. We do have potential disposal sites aside from our own, which was number 15. We have number 16 and number 21 on the north side, which can potentially be used as disposal sites. 16 and 21 would require the creation of a plan, creation of the site, and a little more investigation to make sure 21 isn't a wetland like Little Africa ended up being. But so that's the goal is to start as far east as we can, slow down the sediment, consolidate where it's impacting, and localize it. That way we can make our operation more efficient and then not worry about losing this entire bay on the east. And really, I know we generally have public question at the end, but can I?
If you're okay with it, I tell you what we'll do. I'd like you to take specific questions from the board first.
All right.
And then we will open it to public, and these will be questions about what he's presented, not opinions about should we or shouldn't we. But if you have specific, that's a lot of information. So let's start with the board. Fire away. Anybody?
I guess I had a question
Yes.
on, right now we have ongoing dredging operations within our budget. So what will doing this do to those ongoing, because there's maybe $100,000 a year we're spending on that? Can some of that money, will we be able to shift that? And would we actually realistically, I think you already stated, we would not do any part of this dredging, even though we could do mechanical dredging in the first phase, you wouldn't suggest that we would?
The million that's budgeted in here plans on utilizing hired contractors and not the 100,000 that we have budgeted. Of that 100,000 for dredging, it's really about less than 40,000 that's actually hours for LLCD dredging, where the rest of that goes to private dredging, maintenance, debris removal. So out of that 100,000, everybody says 100,000 for dredging, it's really about half of that goes to LLCD digging. One of the things that we could do, since we do have so much potential private dredging, is we could shift the focus of our barges from access dredging to private dredging and actually use that as a revenue generator to feed back some of the costs from this.
Because we've got, I think, 20,000 anticipated in private dredging revenues in the budget for the coming year or something, but
Yeah, we generally fall in right around 18,000, primarily riprap, but if we were to shift more to the private dredging, I think there's lots of money to be made there. If we do want to use some of our own equipment, which we can do, we can actually use that for this if we want to use our monies. Then actually, if we can potentially find grants to help with this along the way, we can use our dredging as a match, so an in-kind match. A lot of the grants, if we can find money required upwards from, nothing to say a 50% match, we can actually do an in-kind match. So if we were able to find a grant for this, we could utilize our dredgers and myself in operation and actually include their salaries or the money that we spend on this as a match. But as of now, that million is staying completely hired at the contracting and allowing our dredgers to still focus on the recommendations from the board. And that can be changed. February or annual meeting is when we set the priorities. That the focus can be shifted.
will there be a need on the lake for that?
Yes.
For access dredging? I really think there always will be. Once we're done with the Chippewa channels, we're pretty well caught up. Icebox Cove is the next one on the list, and there's probably about 4 or 5 homes back there that have no access. And
When will we be done with
less than
Chippewa?
This year.
I mean, it would just really be nice to be able to take a chunk of that money and shift it toward this,
Yeah.
because the other thing that maybe you could expand on is, like how that bonding would work, access to more money. Should we
Yes.
not get grant money, and should we want to move forward with like 1 and 2?
What we'll have to do is, for the bonds, we really have to put up our revenue collections, our only guaranteed funds. So we really have to put that up for collateral. What the Indiana Bond Company will allow us to do is utilize the bonds as a line of credit, really, to where we could get approved for, say, the whole lump sum of 3 to 5 million or however much we want, then we can actually take out the money as we use it. So say we get approved for 6 million, we want to do this first step next year, we can actually take out $1 million for that as a line of credit and then start to pay back interest on that $1 million, and then still have the pocket of money available but not being utilized or paid on. And so we would have to budget for any of our potential, correct me if I get wrong on this, Michael, but so the money that we take would have to be budgeted for, but I think we could get approved for more, and as long as we're not planning on taking that revenue, it wouldn't need to be budgeted as income. So we could get approved for 6 million and say just take out the $1 million next year and still be in line with our budget.
Do other board members have questions for Adam?
For the $1 million that's targeted for phase 1, the cost of phase 1, are there any design fees or additional fees beyond $1 million that are specified?
The design on this would be very, very minimal. One of the benefits of this is it's essentially standard channel maintenance, which we have been doing. So we go in and hire the barges to dig out these channels to our specifications. But aside from that, there's really minimal, if any, engineering work that would need to go into this. Once we get into the water diversion structure, we would have to have some more engineering studies done. That would be pretty cheap made of and permitting, which the cost for permitting is pretty minimal, it'll just be the design for that. So as far as digging the actual channels, I don't believe there'd really be much, if at all, need for more design, engineering design for that phase one. Once we get into phase two, if we get into there and we're starting to look at the dredging, doing the bag systems, potentially creating berms, reinforcement, that is gonna really kind of get more into the design side. And they've been estimating as we move forward on the phases about 10% potentially of what the construction design cost would be. But for this phase one, it'd be minimal, if at all. Really, we know how to dig the channels. We've been doing it for a decade now for the one-step removal. So once we hire the contractors and let them know where we want the location, I mean, maybe a little mapping just for coordinates, but aside from that, I mean, it's really what we've been doing.
So the design should be well less than 10%.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
And potentially cover another 30% contingency that.
Yeah, I would think that 30% would definitely cover any type of design. And I think we can come in, I mean, when we looked at contracting out before, we were in the $12 to $15 range per yard. So if we're still in that and we're looking at 40,000 yards, well then we're still, I mean, that's under 800,000 right there, 750,000. So I think we could fall well below that million, including the potential design costs.
For the diversion structures, which if I read this properly, is something that we look probably in a phase two or between 1 and 2.
Yeah, once we get into permitting, that's when we want to do those.
For what does the diversion structures look like, or how can you explain that a little bit?
So there's different potential ones that do it. They have subwater diversion structures, and then you have above water structures. Now, if you get into the ones underneath the water, you really have to look at water level, functionality, and making sure they're accessible. But we have to keep this navigable. Ideally, or what I kind of foresee happening is above water diversion structures, where these potential structures are going to go in, it's almost where the creek takes a 90 degrees. So essentially what you would do is create a weir coming off of the 90 towards a freshly opened channel that would come about halfway out. That way high flows, it's really forcing that. Now you could use earth for that and riprap. You could use soil for that and stabilize with trees. You could actually even use debris, woody debris and down trees that actually compact almost like a beaver dam that would come out. So what I would picture will probably end up happening would be above surface structures that would come out about halfway into the channel right off the corners. And that would either be stone, vegetation, or debris.
For mitigation sites, so we also look at potential mitigation sites west of what's illustrated on the map.
To use for mitigation, we have not looked at potentially creating wetlands west. Anywhere that we would need to, we really actually have to bring in soil and probably make it more shallow. The only potential that I can think of in my head would be the Possum or the Shuffle Creek area. That actually already has like a pretty nice wetland forming right there and not a whole lot of room. So I think the most feasible and cost effective, so we're not shipping dirt all the way down to the west end, would be on the east end here. And if we can't, I don't picture us creating more impact than we can mitigate on site. But if we did for some reason, and we can't find locations, we can use what's called the in-lieu program, where we can pay into DNR to mitigate versus creating the wetlands ourselves. And the Corps also said as we enhance some of these wetland areas from a low functioning wetland to higher functioning, the shrub, scrub, and forested, they will actually consider those benefits and improvements towards our mitigation, so potentially reducing our mitigation need if we can show that we're benefiting and
Sort of banking in advance.
exactly, yeah. So if we can enhance the functionality in certain areas, then they'll kind of not a one-for-one mitigation, they'll consider that our overall mitigation needs.
You mentioned revenue potential for wetland banking, like selling credits to I-69 or whatever. What type of revenue potential does that look like?
It'd be about 70 to 80,000 is what they're estimating per acre. Some of the trickier parts of that are we do have to maintain that, and then it gets locked into perpetuity. So once it's a wetland bank, it has to be a wetland bank. We've been told that you can allow succession to happen, so you have to maintain it for about 4 to 5 years, and then you can let it take its natural course. And then once those are in a wetland bank, you really actually have to turn them over if you use that for mitigation to really to DNR, and they log those, so that would be something that we would have to go through with the city, which we have to anyways, as we get this plan, to potentially turn it.
Obviously, our focus has been predominantly on the east side of the lake. Are we looking at things that we can do? Because obviously we do have Shuffle Creek at the cove, Icebox Cove, other inlets into the water that are bringing some degree of sedimentation, obviously not near the volume that we have on the east side. Are there things that we can do in addition to what we're planning in the big picture here on the east side to also help mitigate the sedimentation coming in?
Absolutely. One of the things that we decided early on was potentially hiring, while this is primarily focusing on this, there's actually a few really good local firms that are much, much cheaper for smaller projects like that. Like the vet firm that we use for our water delineation on South Africa. So we've kind of decided that we'd like to hire one of them to go around and look at the other small inlets. And ideally, the measures on those would be stuff that we could perform in-house.
Sure.
So I think we could potentially a very cheap report on measures that we could do on those, and then in-house our own equipment knock those out as we move forward.
I think that would be important for us to consider, because obviously it's important to make sure that we're saving the east side of the lake, but we also need to make sure that we're doing similar maintenance to protect the integrity of the lake throughout the lake.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, great
You
question.
know, this, another suggestion is sort of spurred my memory here. I see that Monroe County is in the process of redoing their planning regulations. And if I recall properly, logging on steep slopes is not allowed around Lake Lemon, but it is, around Lake Monroe, but it is allowed here. And that business out right off of Shuffle Creek Road, that was some pretty steep stuff. And all going into Shuffle Creek. And so maybe as part of this too, we need to be involved with that process and try to get Lake Lemon added to that restriction like the other ones are.
And I really think that's something that we should, as a board or some of the members, potentially go to the CBU meetings and advocate for that. Bob Madden, they were actually initially coming up with that environmental overlay, was on their committee, and for some reason it included essentially all water and nature areas in Monroe County except for Lake Lemon. There's many hypotheses of why that is. There's never been a clear answer, but I agree that we really need to look at all potential options for reducing sediment.
Any other board comments or questions before we turn it over? All right, I'll let you entertain public questions if you'd like.
I got some comments to add to Adam's presentation. First, this is just our planning stage, and we have more steps in our planning stage. We won't be finished until August or maybe even September for what we're doing. But we've accelerated this part for the purpose of the board getting information to address the funding elements that are in the budget for 2019. So there is more things to go on. You just haven't heard everything yet. Parts, ask questions about other pieces east of what's going, or west of what's going on. And yes, we have not shown on this map, but there's pieces about adding sediment bags and increasing the area that goes around the trestle for the railroad. So, and there's other parts that we talk about for possum trot, to go through and do a diversion for possum trot into a wetland area over there. So our main water banks that we're looking at, it's not just Bean Blossom Creek, but there's other pieces and parts to that. We're just not at that stage yet. One comment about the delta movement. If you look at your maps and you look at items 6 through 10, that originally was lake back in the late 50s and early 60s. And then the deltas formed. Now we're looking at items 1 through 5 is emerging delta. We don't see it yet because it's below the water line. It's moving down the lake, folks. So this is, and we'll have more documentation for the upcoming big meeting that will be presented in October. I believe we're trying to set up a date. So there's more information coming. Next piece is Corps of Engineers has documented a few things for us, or I should say Shrewsbury has identified a few things for us that are first time things for the Corps Engineers and IDOT and others within the state of Indiana to happen. First, as far as lake bed impact, we have never had any lake within the state of Indiana that has allowed some impact to the lake bed. So us adding in these diversion pieces affects the lake bed. We're putting things on the lake bed. We have conceptual approval to do that if we prepare the right plans. Second is relocation of sediment. So if we take sediment from one place in the lake and put it in another place of the lake, we have conceptual approval to do that. We're the first lake in Indiana to do that. They're looking that we're going to become the model of how they do things within the state of Indiana.
And Frank, for clarification on that too, I'm presuming that while we may be the first in Indiana, there are examples in other locales?
Absolutely. These are already things that are recognized and methods that are already, that Shrewsbury is involved with or knows of, that happen in Kentucky, happen in Ohio, happen within the Louisville Core District. It's just not in Indiana. So to the Indiana staff, it's a little new. And for the Indiana regulatory people, it's a little new. But for the core people who work on a district area that include Tennessee, Kentucky, Ohio, plus Indiana, it's not new. And then lastly, Adam, you made a comment regarding the bank, and buying credits is $70,000 to $80,000. Us selling credits is $60,000 to $70,000. There's a $10,000 wash that the DNR takes along the way. So we don't get all of that. We'd be more on the $60,000 of income, where we could pay as high as $80,000. So it's really how those numbers are.
Thank you, Frank.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Fred Vansell. I've been on the lake for 50 years, so you remember canoeing down these pathways, if you want to open back up. 50 years ago, I don't remember the lake being up there, but I remember pathways being up there. Are these pathways going to be navigable? And if so, it looks like they're going to block them off on phase 2. And one other follow-up question, have you considered all of the stumps that are on the east end of the lake? Anybody that's been here for a while that's seen the lake drain down knows that this whole end of the lake was filled with stumps. I broke a crop 30 years ago on that. So just by doing this dredging, don't think that it's going to be safe for skiing because you need to remove the stumps.
As far as, I'll start with opening the channels. The goal is to maintain Bean Blossom Creek as a primary navigation channel. And then as we dig these out, we're looking at 40-foot wide by 5 foot. So they would be navigable while they may not be thoroughfares to the main lake, where they would kind of get cut off on this eastern bay if we do create that wall there. There will still need to be access at certain areas through that berm. That way, like high flows and flood situations, water can still come over. So while they're not going to be main thoroughfares, they will be accessible by boat and potentially increase recreation, fishing, and just utilization. Potentially, we're looking as well as we dig this at connecting another thoroughfare that would go along this Dorothy Lane area to that area east of Point Eidolon. So that could potentially be a boating channel. Those would be like the two that we would still keep open, use as main boating channels. So the goal of these is going to be opening up for the water flow, but not thoroughfares for navigation, though they would be open enough that we could navigate there. As far as the stumps, we will have to work in concert with hydraulic dredging and potentially maybe draw down so we can mark them. So we can go out with our mechanical stuff to remove the stumps to allow the hydraulic dredgers to go in to these areas right here. And then as we're mechanically dredging with the excavators, they'd be fully capable of removing stumps that are in those potential channels.
Not just the channels, but in the lake itself. I mean, the part that, if you saw that whole draw down the whole lake, you will see hundreds of large stumps in that.
Yeah, that's why we'd have to work in concert with the mechanical operation, so we could actually remove anything that would potentially get in the way from other types of methods.
You're talking about all of 1 through 5, right, Deb?
Even west of 1 through.
Right.
5.
Yeah, I agree, that whole bay is.
Up to Reed Point is what you're saying.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I just have one concern, it has nothing to do with any property I own, but on 17, that point that comes out, when it eventually becomes a wetland, or whatever's on that, it's gonna block the view of all those houses all the way out to Linda Ellis's. And of course, that's where we get all that debris, so keep the debris from in there, but I would feel opposed to making that point come out, I would rather see that go across the the shoreline, and I would advocate for those people.
Yeah, and that's fine. Again, this is just very conceptual. This area, if it were to be utilized, wouldn't be a wetland. It would actually fill it in with dirt and stabilize it for parking. And also one of the things that Shrewsbury is saying in 17, it's going to be very expensive to utilize enough riprap or steel wall to create that outside perimeter. So it is a potential option. It may not be one of the cost-effective ones. And we left it on there because it's one of the things that we are looking at. Will it happen? It's up to say, but it is one of the least cost-effective measures on
And
there.
I have one more comment, is that I attend a lot of Monroe County government meetings, and a lot of people know me. As a matter of fact, some commissioner who I've never met said, "Oh, I know, you're Sergio Hala, and you really advocate for good things." So I want to volunteer if somebody has to go to that meeting, CDB, that meeting, I would volunteer to be one among the people to go to really speak out and advocate for the lake to get the forest protections.
All right, thank you.
So I got a couple questions, but I'm not gonna shoot them all at once, so
All right.
I'll just ask one a couple at a time. Do you have an estimate of, after we spend $1 million in phase one, of how much of the sedimentation that we're getting into the lake is no longer coming into the lake as a result of that?
It's a little tough to get solid calculations on how much sediment we're actually going to stop. What we can say is if we can get 80% to 90% of the sediment-laden flow to go through this filtration network, then we can potentially reduce 80 to 90% of the sediment loading. What's tough to do is, even when I work for Department of Environmental Management, is you really have to look at your proven methods and your best management practices. And the only way to find out officially at the end how much you reduce was to test beforehand and then test afterwards and set your goals and compare them to the goals. But effectively, if we can get 80% of the sediment-laden water through here, then we could really reduce the sediment loading by approximately 80%.
Okay, so follow-up question is, in phase two, it was kind of a mix of dredging and these diversion areas. So the diversion obviously is helping to get the flow into the right area.
Yes.
So $1 million to maybe have rivers, but not necessarily know whether water's going there.
Well, diversions would be very, very cheap to actually put in.
So that was my question,
yeah.
is how much of the 1.9 is diversion versus dredging?
Probably under 100,000.
And why is, and
How much
the only reason you
is it?
didn't put it in phase one is because of the permit?
Because we can, yes, we can start currently on opening up the channels. So if we wanted to start next year and we had the money, we could start opening up the channels. What we're looking at doing once we get into the permitting is applying for the entire project for a permit which would encompass all the different measures. And that's what Army Corps has suggested. Those permits are generally good for 4 to 5 years, but you can extend them indefinitely until your project's done. So we're in the application for the permitting is actually pretty cheap. There's not a whole lot of costs associated with that. So as we get further along, one of the thoughts was we apply for the entire project. That way, as we can implement them in the future, the permitting is already in place. Could we potentially apply for that permitting earlier for, say, just the diversions? Yes, we could. And then as we get closer to that, we can look into that more. But the cost of diversion would be very minimal. It's either just riprap, sediment, or woody debris that would be utilized.
So kind of a third.
100,000, I didn't hear you. 100,000 of that 1.9 million is the diversion.
I would estimate less than that.
So, yeah, I was wrong. So if I heard you right, you said theoretically you could use the equipment we own to do essentially phase one and even the diversion activities. If you put a price tag on that and a timeline on that in lieu of hiring somebody else to do that, does that dramatically change the price tag?
If we introduce the contractors and more equipment, it's a timeline thing where we can knock it down a lot.
Right, I understand.
It's a timeline. If we use our own equipment, say we were doing what we're currently doing in Chipwood, where we're digging with the small barge, unloading, and then trucking it, we're currently digging about the same price as contractors right now, in the $10 to $15 range, which is what the contractors would be in anyways. So one of the thoughts was, if we're paying about the same amount of money per cubic yard,
Go fast.
well, we could bring in more people and go faster and still accomplish other works with our own equipment.
And we don't have the cost of the additional equipment if we want to go faster.
Yes.
Correct. We're not buying it.
But we won't really know our sedimentation results until you really get done with phase one and the diversions in phase two.
Yes.
Down to 80%.
We're making educated guesses.
20% or
That's accurate.
whatever.
I'll have to talk with Shrewsbury to see if we can get some more preliminary stats. But really what you have to focus on is utilizing proven methods that have been used in similar situations.
Well, I think it's a great plan, so please don't take my question.
Oh, great question.
And I want to make sure that we have kind of proof of concept before we raise everybody's taxes with the idea, hey, we're going to save the lake, and then if we go do it and it doesn't have the impact, then.
And we don't have to come back in 2 more years and say,
Exactly.
no, exactly.
Hey, we thought we
That's
were
my
going to save the lake,
concern.
and now we need a little bit more to save the lake.
That's a good redirect to Shrewsbury, I would say, because that's
Absolutely.
been asked before.
I'm gonna jump over here real quick. We've got some people with things up. Yes.
Yeah, I have a couple questions. First of all, back in the first phase, with that 9 term you mentioned, where you first bring off there up by number 6.
Yes.
Being an expert on debris, that's going to clog up everything.
It's gonna
Making
clog
a
up.
turn, you're expecting to go in there, you're just going to get all the big stuff coming up. Okay, secondly, what do you expect the maintenance will be to keep these open, if it does collect debris and sediment every other year, like the refill?
I mean, I would assume every few years we need to go in and move debris. With the diversion that we're gonna have going into these wetlands, ideally, most of the sediment will get caught in those wetland cells outside of the channels. But there will be some maintenance. I mean, eventually down the road, there's no one size fits all when you come to reservoirs. And reservoirs, nothing is done to ultimately fill in. This is Mother Nature reclaiming the land. So there is going to be maintenance that will be ongoing.
And the last thing is, I'm real concerned with 17. My neighbors and I will be blocked off from the lake, which is why production debris for 30 years if we have a ordinance due. That will be taken away, is that correct?
Yeah, this is one of the more costly items. So it's just on there as a potential. And one of the reasons that wouldn't be very tall if it were to happen, one of the reasons we actually thought about that hook was to potentially catch the debris in an area we can easily get.
That's a
So,
positive, that's for sure.
yeah.
I'm just wondering, what elevation would be like in the current one? You have over here, which would be 20 feet up in the air, or what?
It'd be lower than the elevation. The causeway is not lower.
It's cost prohibitive here.
And one of the things that I think is important to note, if you look at the actual written report, is conceptual elements number 17, 21, 22, and 23 were eliminated for immediate consideration. So those are the absolute lowest priorities on the plan because of a variety of factors, and I'm sure the concerns that are expressed were one of those factors.
Hi, my name's Spencer Ryder. Just for everybody's knowledge, I'm a professional engineer. I've worked on projects for decades. I have no problem with the engineering that's on this project, okay? Solid plan. But you're missing a piece. You're missing the financials. This budget is not a financial plan to implement a $7.8 million project. And by their own tolerances, minus 20 plus 100, we're talking $6.4 to $15.6 million. And like I said, I've done a lot of projects, I've been on a lot of successful projects, I've been on some projects that failed. And I can guarantee you, one way to fail is not to have your financials figured out ahead of time, before you start, before you turn that first shovel. And you're talking about spending $1 million to build a foundation without knowing how to build the rest of the house. And we've seen people have done that. You go drive around, you see foundations in frames and they're just sitting there. And you need to put together a financial plan. That's the next phase. Phase one is not to dig. Phase phase one is your design, which you got, phase two is your financial plan. Get your financial plan in order, some kind of a budget that's realistic. You know, the 2/3 drops $6 million on your lap. You've got to figure out where your money's going to come from. And then start executing the plan. But if you just start executing without the financials, you limit your options in the future, because now you spent the money. And part of that plan's got to be ongoing maintenance after all these phases are done. You know, there's a lot of money, but you know, so we say we get all 4 phases done in 10 years. Well, that doesn't mean we stop paying for the phases, because we've got bonds out there. And so we've got all that financial burden we got to carry on top of trying to keep all these areas open on the other side of the wall there that we're trying to establish. I really don't feel like you've got, this is a great start. I'm encouraged. But we need a financial plan. We can't just move forward without having at least some idea where this money's gonna come from. Thanks.
Just a quick comment on that. If, through our discussions and through kind of my thoughts on my own, if we didn't accomplish any of this, what we're calling phase 2 on, just opening up these initial channels and having more room for sediment filtration and catchment and entrapment there would be significantly better than what we have now with it just pipelining out.
Well, I agree with that, because before we dredged the first shovel full of dirt, the first thing we did was open up Green Blossom Camp. And I told the board, all they're doing is letting more sediment in the lake. And then a year later, a woman from Idaho, when she found out we dredged that channel, she goes, that's the worst thing they've done. So I agree, if we can spread this out, it's a good thing, but I really would like to see a plan, some kind of a plan, some kind of idea where the money's going to come from.
We've been definitely discussing that. One of the things that's troubling us is to wait to start. We're already behind. The Shrewsbury folks are like, you're losing the leg. Not to start a panic, but I hate to see us stumble and not get started. If we can never do the rest of it, that'd be very sad, but I still love to think that we'll figure it out. But the more time, the more years that go by, you could see it. I don't know how much time you spend down on the East End. It's not very fun anymore. I mean, it's coming.
My frustration is we've given you $100,000 a year to work on the health of the lake, and you have not done that.
Well,
you have not.
It was for access dredging. It was not for the greater
So
good.
you sacrificed the health of the lake to provide access for freehold.
That
I'm not saying that's right or wrong.
That was what was determined by the then powers of you. So, all right.
I'm saying it's wrong. I'm just saying we have done
Okay, fair enough, fair enough.
In a past life, I was a bean counter, and I agree, we need a plan. We all have a plan at home when we're paying our bills. We don't need to discuss that here, that's not the intent. My question, I really don't have a question, it's one of clarification. I like cowboy math.
Excuse me, one second.
Yeah.
Excuse me, gentlemen, I need you to be listening, thank you. Okay,
It's
sorry.
one of clarification. I've gone to a lot of meetings, they're really good. I heard we bring 25,000 cubic yards in a year, and I heard we take out 10,000 cubic yards a year. More or less, good numbers, moving forward. We're gonna save with 2 phases, forget cost for a minute. Because I'm a bean counter, I know cost. I was a CFO, controller. You don't want overhead. All right, back to my question. Simple math, cowboy math. 80% of 25,000 is 20,000, which is twice what we're taking out now. I rest my case.
Thank you.
Can I just say something about the money? We pressed Shrewsbury to come up with numbers to put in here so that we could make this meeting, right? So these numbers, we kind of pulled them out of, rough estimates a week ago. All of this has to be refined. So please don't take any of this as, the only thing we really do know is how much it costs to take out each yard of material, so we have a pretty good idea on doing the channels. But everything moving forward there is just an estimate at this point.
And it's not feasible to say take out bonding for all this and then pay that back. We are gonna have to look at grants and maybe foundations money, foundations that we started up trying to get other organizations that put money in that need to do work or PR. So I don't think it's feasible to say that we're gonna end up taking out a bond for $7 to $10 million and then having to use tax money as collateral because that was skyrocket.
I don't have a question. I don't have
Link, I have a request. Would you please try to find some pictures of the kind of bad situation you are going to put and put it on the website, so people can see exactly what you hope to plan for?
As we move forward, we're hoping it's a very nice conceptual design so that we can add some artistic touches there.
Pictures worth 1,000 words, you can actually show people what it's going to do. There's a lot less doubt in what you're doing.
On the diversion channels, I've heard, as you go into those, you said 40 by 5 foot. Are they going to dig like a deep hole at the entrance of those for that sediment to slow and settle right there? And for the cleaning out, that would be kind of a measurable what you're keeping from, progressing onto the lake proper and stuff.
Initially, we're not looking at digging deep holes. What we kind of hope to do is keep the velocity in the forest high until it gets to our diversions to push it into this wetlands. Instead of it settling out right there, you keep the flow high through these channels and then it spreads out and diverts into the wetlands.
So then you'll just be maintaining those?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, and with those above water diversions, is that going to prohibit the barges from getting back in there if you block half of the?
We would have to take that into design consideration that we do not want to block any bars from doing that.
Okay.
Does that cover all the questions? Oh, Frank?
Just a clarity statement. In phases, maybe in phase 2, but more in phases 3 and 4, when we look at dealing with the sediment management behind the wall, yes, we would end up with pits that would collect if you looked at sediment in 3 forms, the sandy gravel stuff, the stuff that drops out right at the delta when it stops beyond the sandy gravel stuff, and then the finest silt that we end up on everybody's dock after the water levels drop. So yes, we would potentially have pits in the channels and in the retention area that's, to the right of the blue line, so that we could use that and use our own maintenance equipment to get that heaviest sediment out. And yes, the diversion channels would go through and collect sediment, would collect debris, so we wouldn't get those stumps that would be further down the lake, and would create new deltas that we would have to continue to manage. But that's all part of the plan, is to push all of that on the far east end and not go beyond the walls where we have. So it's all part of the concepts that haven't been finished yet in the planning stage, including all the funding parts that will be done late August or September and then presented at the big meeting that we have in October. So this is only the piece so that the board can understand the first element of opening up the channels and how we would best spend the first $1 million.
I'll do one more, then we're gonna be done.
Okay, just one comment. I would like to dial back the rhetoric on the lake is dying.
Right.
And the panic stuff.
Yeah.
It's taken 60 years for that little area at the mouth of the channel to fill in. There's and the rest of the lake is essentially the same as it was when we bought it 50 years ago. In fact, the navigation up Dean Watson Creek is 4 times wider and more navigable since the 100-year flood than it ever was before. So yes, that far end of the lake is filling in slowly, very slowly. So there's time to plan, there's time to get all the ducks in a row, there's time to make decisions. And the lake is not going to die anytime soon.
Even when we say save the lake, that doesn't do anything for anybody's property.
No. We understand.
Right? So
Yeah.
we can just plan to save the lake. This plan kills the lake less fast, right? So
Planning to preserve the lake.
Yeah,
Preserve,
exactly.
that's a better word.
I think the messaging and the communication style of this, both for freeholders and for the public at large, is really important. And the language that's used needs to be carefully considered and adhered to by the board and all freeholders so that the message is consistent.
I agree, totally. Preserve does sound much better than.
Preserve and restore.
Well, and restore, sure. Okay, does that conclude your, you, actually, Adam got so excited that was the strategic planning committee update, I'm sure, as opposed to what I thought it was gonna be, which was the manager's report, which is fine, which is great. So I think what we'll do now, I hate to keep confusing the agenda, but why don't we, Michael, if you are ready to go with the proposed budget second reading. We'll give your voice a rest, Adam, and let you do your manager's report after that. Does that make sense? Okay.
Okay.
Sorry.
No, that's all right. Nobody wants their taxes raised. I'm a resident on the lake. I don't want my taxes raised, but this is what the committee has come up with. The $1 million is what the Finance Committee has come up with a recommendation from the Strategic Planning Committee. And so here goes the second read of the 2019 budget. The revenues, page 1, obviously Brown County taxes and Monroe County taxes would be increased. Item 4040 and 4050. And then the bond loan proceeds, item 4140 for $1 million bond to start the project. Page 2, wages, an increase in the district manager's wage, a decrease in the operations supervisor's wage, and of course decreases in perf and health insurance. As we do always, the dredger's been here for more than 10 years. 50-cent increase per hour for the dredger and the assistant dredger brings their salaries up. Actually, the grand total in wages is decreased at the bottom by $1,000 on page 2. I'll stop if the board has any comments at this point. Page 3, supplies. We have an increase in merchant fee supplies. We have an increase in seasonal launch permits. We did buy an AED. We are going to buy an AED this year, which is the $3,000 for the 2018 proposed for medical, and $1,000 for radios at $6,280. Again, the grand total in supplies has been decreased by $500. Next page, services and charges. We put the $1 million in the consulting engineers, 6330. We're not paying the consulting engineers $1 million. That's just where we propose to put the $1 million bond to pay the contractors to build the areas that Adam just covered. Subscriptions and membership, 6410 is increased. The newsletter, which I think Kathy's doing a really good job on that, increased to $600. Other printing, obviously, is going to be increased to $500. But down to the total is even, the 2019 and 2018 budget. The next page. Services and charges continued. We're going to add an additional $10,000 for buildings and grounds to increase improvements to the bathhouse, etc. If you come to the park, you know that we need some increases in some things here.
That's an ADA compliance.
That was proposed for an ADA compliant bathhouse. Thank you. Dredging and equipment repairs has been reduced. Equipment rental, we won't be renting any equipment. We bought the excavator last year. Water testing has increased to $1,000. We will need a dam and spillway inspection next year for $5,000. We did come up with a pre-sediment management plan, as Adam also introduced, so that we can do some pre-sediment management to phase 1 for $10,000. And then to pay the bond back, we have a debt service of $67,000. We took about 2.5% on the $1 million for a 20-year bond. Came to about $67,000. Debris removal has been increased $500, and then ramp repairs, we've increased there $2,000. That concludes the other services and charges. If you look at the last page, as Pam mentioned last month, we've never seen this page have all zeros in it. Again, for a second consecutive year. No capital outlays for 2019 are included in the 2019 budget.
I question whether or not this $1 million should be considered capital outlay. It bothers me to leave it in this. I think it needs its own category and shouldn't be just sitting in there in that consulting engineers. I mean, it's definitely, a
We
major-
certainly will take a recommendation from you.
Yeah, I would second that. I mean, it's kind of misleading and, you know, as brought up at the last meeting and this time, it's not $1 million to give to the consultants, but it sure looks that way on paper. And, you know, if we could just maybe label it a little more descriptive.
Maybe,
Phase 1 construction of the sediment management plan.
yeah.
Which
Okay.
includes consulting services.
That's right.
What's the other stuff?
Yeah, like
Cost
if we
sediment
subtotaled those, because there's, I don't know, is this pre-sediment management plan that we're budgeting $10,000 for part of that? And disposal site preparation and then the debt service? I mean, it seems like everything having to do with whatever it is we end up doing should be kind of subtotaled together somewhere.
That disposal site is for maintenance of our current disposal site. So that does not include the new depth.
Yeah, it sure would be nice to have all that dredging all together somewhere.
Is it too late to relabel?
No.
No, not at all.
not at all.
That's why we're having a second
We-
read.
We will have a third read in August, and at that point, it will be two.
Right.
And this is a gnat, but you know, it's
After
the
that.
counting in me, but this grass mowing under professional services, like, why isn't that like repairs and maintenance? I mean, I just think you're paying lawyers, you're paying accountants, you're paying, you know, I just personally wouldn't put it there. That 6310, I think I'd make it in the 6200s or something.
Okay.
Not to say that grass mowing isn't professional, but you know
This-
what I'm saying.
This has been the same budget that we've had for almost
Right.
20 years, so
It's right,
I
I
don't
got
think
it.
we've ever had a CPA on the board.
Yeah. We gotta
So
set a new
this would be the time to make your recommendation. I've got grass mowing in the 6200s, and so what other changes do you have?
I think we wanted to group everything having to do with whatever it is we're gonna do together.
Well, but can you do?
The $1 million out of consulting engineers and to the Phase 1 sediment management plan.
Right, but that has to be independent of the $100,000 budget that we already have for.
That is
So-
independent.
And it is, we could really just rename that consultant engineer as sediment management.
Yes.
And I'm not, but to Debbie's point, I'm not sure that having it in services, or at least the full $1 million in services is the appropriate place. I think a good portion of that is legitimate capital outlay.
Right.
So,
Okay.
so I think it should be, we need to look at that a little bit.
And
more.
it might play better really and have a greater understanding if it really was shifted to capital outlay, quite frankly. I mean, it's a pretty big,
And if we do want to shift those, I would encourage a motion or directive now, because on August 10th is our first meeting with the Department of Local Government and Finance, where we start to put our budget and everything online for review. So I would encourage, if we do want to move that, we can move it afterwards in August if we're not ready to.
It's better to do it now.
I think,
I mean, we make the changes that we discussed. Is that what you're looking for?
yeah, that's,
Mm-hmm.
and I would second that. And if I can suggest to just look at the state's definitions for capital outlay, because a portion of that $1 million may still be appropriate to have in the services lines for, you know, consulting and, I mean, there would be bond issuance costs as well, but those may be under state guidelines for capital outlay.
We have a DLGF field rep, Ryan Burke. I've made contact with him.
Yeah.
This is appropriate to him
Okay.
as far as the DLGF is concerned and State Board of Accounts, but I will make another phone call to him and ask him about the capital outlays
Yeah.
and dividing the $1 million capital outlay, and I'll get with Adam to see approximately what the consulting engineer cost is, take that out of the million and put the remainder into capital outlays.
How soon do you think we can pull together this financial plan? To Spencer's point, and then you indicated in the October meeting, we're kind of wrestling with this whole budget thing. We've got a kind of a swag in here, I would call it. And I loved your suggestions and ideas about, I mean, I'm excited about doing that diversion, like pulling in that part into, you know, what we're gonna do. So just, you know, I don't think we have the specificity just yet. I mean, I agree we need to start, you know, but maybe this needs to be a bigger number. And I'll just make a statement now. My perception and discussions is that it's a matter of appetite and what, you know, are the freeholders willing to take on and what could be taken on in an initial phase to do something. And this 27% increase seemed to be what people felt would kind of be at that maximum level. I am concerned about agreeing on a plan and looking at having to come, when some of these people are not on the board, and have to come back and say, well, we didn't get the grant, and we didn't get this, and now we need another 50%, you know, so, it's still a little squishy to me.
But I think that's the whole discussion, is that we may not be go beyond phase one.
Right.
And that we're not going to be going back and saying, well, we're gonna go out and finance $6 million, as Adam said, that's not feasible for everyone, so.
I think we have pretty good figures for this first phase. And if that's all we do, it's still a good thing. And so, I mean, I'm in favor of continuing at least with that, and then we'll work through the rest of it as
But can we, and Adam, will you go back to Shrewsbury, and can we seriously consider pulling that diversion, that wall, this walkway? I mean, I think that would play so much better too. I mean, aesthetically, it would look nice and things like that, and people could have further enjoyment. And if it's really as cheap as you say, I would love to push that in, you know, to the first phase.
Well, I could.
Well, that diversion wasn't the large diversion on the wetland. This is for the in-stream diversion that we were talking about.
The little red lines
But you're
by the
saying-
channel.
you're saying that-
That's a 50 to 75, probably at most 100,000.
12 is
The big
pretty-
blue line is really the
Potential.
sucking sediment out of area 1 and creating the big blue line in some characteristic. And
But I mean, they actually have some nice landscape architects and designs, so we're gonna get them to do some mock-ups of potentials for the median for imagery.
So do we need to go backward on this motion, or is this, do we still want to
I
work?
think the motion is still appropriate, and I would
Okay.
Can we
recommend.
get the motion clarified?
Could you
We just,
restate
we
the
would
motion?
like the costs related to the sediment mitigation segregated separately and reclassified as capital outlay.
I've got that. Okay.
Michael made the, did you second or?
I second.
You seconded that, okay, they just flipped, I think.
Okay.
You made the first one. All right, it has been moved and seconded. Any further discussion?
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were taking over.
No, oh, I'm sorry, you can.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. So that motion carries. So we'll get with the finance committee that consists of myself, Pam, and Mary Jane, and we'll reclassify the $1 million into capital outlays.
Okay.
Okay?
Andrew?
Does that satisfy the board?
Yes, if you need help with this clarification, we can do it after the meeting, Andrew. I know you have to write all this down. Okay.
Okay.
Thanks.
That concludes the 2019 second read, Madam Chair.
Thank
Did we
you.
vote on that question?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, it was kind of jumbled.
Okay.
Did you want to revote?
No, it's because
It was favorable.
okay.
But if you want to revote, you can. Okay. All right, thank you, Michael. Now, Adam, how about the manager's report?
We're really brief. As of yesterday, we removed 4,264 yards from the Chitwood channels, and we're continuing working on that. We did finally have one of our first kind of breakdowns on the new barge. We had to replace a lower unit on the barge. There's actually only $800 for a lower unit, which is a pretty small cost of doing business when we're dealing with that big of machinery. Our fireworks, it was a record year for fireworks donations, both from the lake and from the public. We brought in $7,430, and actually just got some more right here. So we recouped all of our fireworks costs and even the cost for the bathhouses, and now we've had to bring out the porta pots and stuff. So that was really good. Aquatic vegetation treatment, we're shooting to get in right at the end of the month, at the latest, the first week into August. They'll be coming back, we'll be treating the lotus maintenance lines, different spots of lotus around the lake, as well as a handful of submerged areas. East of Point Eidolon will be retreated, and we actually went out and did some mapping just a couple of days ago and did an entire shoreline look for other areas. Once we know what the date is, we will be sending out an update with the date and a map of all the locations that will be treated, so everybody will have a heads up on that.
You mentioned, Adam, about the shoreline and what you've directed the aquatics folks up in our area, just because other.
Yeah, on the eastern part of Eidolon, there's a few areas where some of the docking structures get so tight and stuff to get kind of back between the docking areas and the void spaces. So we're going to make sure they can actually get off and get on docks, and it's right behind these areas between docks and the shoreline locations where it's been adjusted like that.
Thanks.
That's really all I have.
That's it? Okay. Well, I'm glad you did the big one first. That was good. It worked out. I like that.
I did have a question, because as a follow-up to our meeting and our water quality report, will you be back in touch with her about these best practices and things like that we discussed, and non-functioning septics, and I want to keep that kind of front and center on it.
Yeah, I think really if we're gonna get a report on that for best management practice, we'll probably just call the Brown County Health Department. I can see if I can get some literature from them as far as the septics and holding tanks.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay, one more item, but last but not least, before public comment, Sue Miller. Sue, do you feel like standing up here with me? Come on up. Sue was a representative for District 2, and Deb Ladyman has now graciously stepped in, but I want to, as is our custom, recognize you. Thanks for coming.
This is a much better replacement.
She's got her stuff together.
You guys,
Oh, sorry about that.
some of what I'm going to say is a bit of a repeat of a quick tribute I gave to you when you left in January, February. But the good news is we're all getting old enough, nobody remembers what I said. I'm kind of hoping that I just want to thank you on behalf of your board and honor you for your service to your slate, to your board, and to me. Three things that truly supported us all. You had a lot of courage, I thought, when you stepped up and said you would be my vice chair. You weren't very long or
You call it courage, I call it stupidity.
Well, I do remember that you said, I'll do it as long as I don't have to go to a funeral. I think that was what our executives do. So
That's right.
fortunately, there have been no funerals, and I'd like to keep it that way. You spent a lot of time on the phone with me. You were a great listening ear. It was a tumultuous time. Small bar was really a big topic, and there was a lot of angst, and I appreciated all of your time that you spent listening and offering your opinions. You ran a summer meeting in my house. No small.
I know, that's something I had him about it.
No fights ever happened.
I know. You went to a lot of extra meetings with me. You spent a lot of time. You shot straight. Yeah, I could always count on you to get your own knowledge, no matter who's been in your ear. You made your own decisions, and I think you're very opinionated. You made good choices, and you don't let anybody tell you what to do. I value that. And lastly, your sense of humor. I can tell a few things, but I won't. I'll embarrass you. But I do remember one summer meeting. I walked in, and it was before some big decisions. And Sue takes a look at me, and she goes, dun, dun, dun. And I kind of went from being anxious to smiling, so I appreciate that. One regret I have is that you and I didn't get together more often outside of meetings for refreshments. And you do know what I mean.
You get these new channels.
Yes. Okay. I'd like to commit to things around. Thank you for the grateful board. And Adam, I'll let you take it from here.
That's customary. Some of our Gene McCarney original photos.
I was looking forward to this.
So we just wanted to, this is one of the only one I've ever seen of people actually drinking. I think it was very cool from Gene.
Yeah.
So it's presented to Sue Miller in recognition of 4 years of service for the LCD Board of Directors District 2 from 2014 through 2017.
Thank you.
So thank you very much.
It was another guy. I met a lot of people. I knew nobody on the lake. I don't know anybody in Bloomington. We moved up here after being in Tennessee for 29 long years. And I've made some friends, and I've learned an awful lot, and mostly good. And one thing we have, I will love this lake. This has been the best move of all the moves we've made. I'm so happy and so content here, and we need to preserve this. This is a slice of heaven. You people have no idea how lucky you are to live where we live and the access of what we have.
I'll entertain brief public comment, one at a time, and please come forward if to where Carl is. I might also add that Michael may have to exit a little bit early.
Okay,
He's got company coming.
So if I walk out and it's not because
It's not
I'm
because-
upset with what you said.
I don't think you'll have time, my friend. In order to be very brief, I'm going to be very direct. I hope I don't hurt anyone's feelings. I've gotten very good at looking at difficult situations. Those of you who know me understand why. I've gotten very good at telling the difference between ants and elephants. Okay? Now, I've listened to many very wise, very calm, very concerned people talk about issues about this lake. Okay? These very issues. Very calm, very concerned people. There are two elephants that I have not heard anybody talk about. Okay? I was going to put Mary Jane on the spot, but she's not here. I would like to tell you what those elephants are that I see and ask the board a couple of questions rather than tell you my opinions. The first elephant I see is when there's a large budget increase like this, it's for an advertised purpose. Over time, out of necessity, some of that money has to be used for other things. You alluded to this. Out of our $100,000 dredging budget, a certain amount goes to other things. Deborah, you had alluded to maybe we should be identifying this $1 million as something more specific. Okay, so that doesn't happen. I don't know you very well, but that must be because of your background. Okay? Now, what's going to be going on a year from now, 5 years from now? What is going to just keep that $1 million from getting absorbed into the general budget? And then a few years from now, we're asking for more money for dredging because the $1 million is now just standard operating budget to get by. Don't answer yet. I'm going to give the second question and I'm going to go sit down. The other question is when it comes to disbursement. Everybody's talking about very good plans, and there are many very good minds involved on both sides of the issues. Everybody I've talked to has been wise, okay? No split opinions, okay? But plans change, okay? When it comes time to write the big checks, we're talking about writing checks for consultants or whatever, buying equipment, God knows what we're going to be doing 5 years from now. But all of a sudden, you're writing checks for $200,000, $500,000, and the plan has changed, okay? You all saw what happened in Monroe County over the armored car. Money was there, but plans had changed, okay? And checks were written or contracts were entered into that weren't what everybody was expecting. So what mechanism is there going to be in the future? I think this would solve a lot of concerns so that when the plans change and we say, listen, we're going to spend this much on consultants now, but we've decided to buy this or something else, or we're going to have to take some portion of this to keep the park alive, okay? We've had a budget shortfall. What mechanism is there to make those decisions when the money is actually dispersed? Because we're talking about putting it into an account, everything you talked about. It's not spent till it comes out of there, people. Okay? So look, I think a lot of ants are getting stomped on, and it's very important to stomp on ants. I can only stomp on half as many, so I try to work on the elephants, guys. So
Thank you.
those are my two questions, friends.
All right, thank you, Carl.
Thank you.
Gail?
Are you going to respond to those or no?
Well, please respond. I was looking for
I was saying, luckily I can't go out and just cut checks that have been pre-authorized. So we have to go to the board for anything, really unless it's kind of general operating stuff, kind of over $1,000 has to go to the board and then to the public at a meeting or presented in front of the public. So we can't just go and write willy-nilly $20,000+ checks.
Right.
So.
Right. I mean, and that would have been what I would say to you. Everything we do, Carl, has to be done in front of our public.
I understand that. I'm not sure that many of the people I've talked to understand that very clearly. That's why I asked you
Okay.
to explain
I mean,
it.
we are
Well-
governed by law. I mean, it's.
I understand that.
The other thing is there's oversight by the State Board of Accounts, and I would like to get a copy of that report, and biannually they do come in and look at that. And so, you know, just with my background, looking at internal controls, I mean, they've looked at that, I'm sure they're good, but maybe getting a little bit more knowledgeable about that would be
From getting
good.
absorbed into the budget, because nobody has to write a check for that. It can
Right.
just be a line item in the budget. Oh,
Right.
we need another $100 or $100,000 for this or 50. What keeps that erosion from happening?
Mike?
Probably a recommendation that I was thinking about before we get into the design phase would be 2 signatures on every check.
But you're not answering my question.
Well, the $1
second
million
question is-
can't really get absorbed because there's gonna be no influx from anything else. That's the
So you're
bond
saying the
proceeds, and it's not gonna
$1 million
go
that we're
for.
proposing from now until perpetual forever will always be.
No, it'll be there for the capital outlay and then out, and that's why we're gonna segregate it
So you're
separately.
segregating it completely from the general budget. I want
Right.
everybody to understand.
Yes.
It
yes.
won't get spent on mowing the grass.
Oh, no, no, absolutely
No,
not.
that's,
There are
Yeah.
requirements.
Every month, when we get a report, the line item is designated on what that
So
expenditure
you will
went.
see a subtraction from that $1 million that is.
I just got with Debbie and I
And you
said,
called it a consulting fee prior, it will be called something else in the
Right.
future.
it'll be a capital outlay and it'll be $67.50. And that'll be,
Well, if people have concerns on where the money's going, somebody's gotta do that.
Well, Carl,
before it can go away.
the other thing to add is that just in working with the Indiana Bond Bank, and I've not been in communication with the subcommittee that's working with them, but, you know, you have to lay out exactly how you're gonna spend that money, and you cannot spend it for anything else.
Well, thank you. I think many of the people I've spoken with don't have a clear understanding of it. That's why I asked you to explain.
Now,
are they here now, any of those people? I'm
Not really. I mean,
Okay.
it's been lake residents all around the lake
what I-
that I've talked
Good.
to.
Tell them to come to the whatever.
Well, I
do you
have to.
have enough information from us right now
I
to
do,
take back?
yes.
Okay.
And because of my history in the past of dealing with banks and dealing with $1 million purchases, multi-million-dollar purchases, I understand these things. I understand the oversight. I think many people that I've spoken with do not.
Okay.
That's why I brought it up. I wish more people were.
Yeah, please advocate for them to come. I mean,
I
that's
know
the only,
and I try.
I know you can't drag them, but
I tell them, look, if I can get there, why the hell can't you?
The-
Right.
I like it,
Thank
Carl.
you,
I do.
guys.
Thank you. Thank you for your question.
Carl, one more thing I want to add, though.
Please.
What I've heard from some of my constituents is not the million, but that now we're going to raise the taxes in the $68,000, and how does that get absorbed? Because we will have to pay that over 20 or 30 years, so that would be the only ongoing thing that we'd have to like rethink down the road.
Yeah,
just for full
unless we
disclosure.
get some monies that come in from the outside, and we're writing legislatures and we're writing senators, and we're gonna invite them again to the big meeting in October. We have heard back from a couple. The legislature can't ignore us forever. So those are the things that we're working behind the
Well,
scenes.
we're all on our own, my friend. Realistically, we've got
Yeah.
everybody around the lake can pony up, and that's what we can count on,
Well,
my friend.
yeah.
And everybody
I-
wants to make sure that if we add $1 million to the budget, 5 years from now, only $300,000 is being used for dredging. Wow, what happened to the rest, you know?
Right.
Sure.
And that's everybody's concern, but they don't understand the process, my friend.
That's
You
right.
do. You do. You
Well,
understand it.
been doing it for 33 years. I think I do.
Good questions. Thank you, Carl.
Thank you.
Gail?
Okay, it's a little secondhand information, it's not firsthand, but I just thought I'd put it out there because I heard someone say something. I do own a house on Shipwood Lane, and I know when I was putting my new septic on Shipwood Lane, I was with the health department talking about all the other septics, because many of the houses are footprints. And Russ Herndon in the middle of the lake the other night told me that he was at a Brown County meeting, and they were discussing a new law of that you can't sell a house unless the septic's tested. So that's an interesting thing. And then the other thing I want to say, it
Unless
seems
it's
very
paid for cash.
unimportant because I'm not sure anybody in this room cares about this issue, and I'm sure no one on the board has connections with this issue, and Adam's heard me complain about it, and I mentioned it to Pam, and I want to say it out loud again if I haven't said it. This shelter house is a magnificent structure, And this shelter house will help bring more people here. It was always open to the public when my kids were growing up. We had so many family gatherings. I've had 4 generations at this lake. My youngest grandchildren come here 3 days a week. And my daughter complains, there's one tree for shade and there's a couple, what we fight over picnic tables. Now, we used to always, if a sudden rainstorm came, we ran in here and waited and went back out. If it got too sunny, the kids were overheated, we came in here to eat lunch. Adam mentioned the reason the shelter house isn't open to the public is because there's been trash in it. Well, somebody at some time put trash. That doesn't mean it's always going to be. I was at Yellowwood, which there's more Yahoos at Yellowwood than there ever is here. And they have all their shelter house open. I go to meetings at Bryan Park, which couldn't be held here if they could get in here and bring more people to understand what the lake is. And Bryan Park has several shelter houses already open. They also rent them out. And what they do is they put a sign outside and say, this is rented for this time, you can't use it. Or just a sign saying, when reserved, not open to the public. But I think it's a crime that this place isn't open for the public. And the more we make this an inviting place, the more people will come. During the week, hardly anyone's here. I talk to people in town, been here for 40 years, and say, oh, I never went out to Lake Island. And I want to say, oh, well, come out to Riddle Point. But this would make it double the population coming here if we could just keep this open.
We could certainly talk about putting that on a future agenda for discussion.
If we're worried about people getting in here and that we don't want, put a GoPro camera someplace.
Even if it's fake.
Right.
Yeah. It's a lot cheaper.
And watch.
A lot cheaper. Okay, thanks, Gail. Kathy?
I have 2 things to mention. First of all, I've been working really hard on getting everybody's name on the newsletter list. If you have not gotten the newsletter, or if you know somebody who wants it, we're doing it through Constant Contact. You can go on we can talk to Adam or call me or let me know, and we've got the sign-up list, and we're continually adding. And if you have a problem, we had a few that were marked as unsubscribed. I'm working to getting those unsubscribed. And if you think you signed up and you're not getting the newsletter, come see me. Second thing, September the 15th, we're having our first lemonade fundraiser, which will start to raise some money for beautification of the lake and all kinds of other things. We now have 2 foundations that are open, one in Brown County, one in Monroe County, where you can do tax-deductible donations. 501c3. So our first fundraiser is September 15th. We're doing a home tour of the lake. And we have several residents. This is one of our that has offered. And we're going to, you can get on a boat, and we're going to do home tours at several of the homes on the lake. We're also going to have wine tasting and all kinds of fun that will be based here. And then you'll sign up. So watch the newsletters for that, and also a separate sign-up thing will go out, but it's through our new little group that's raising funds for the LLCD activities here. If you have any questions, you can come and see me.
Cost of tickets for this event?
We're looking at, sorry, we'll come out, Robleski will come out. $20 for a ticket for the tour, plus you can buy a wine tasting bracelet for $10, and then we'll have a lot. The event itself will be free. You can come for free here, but if you want to do the tour, to raise some money, we're going to do that. Plus, we take other donations. So if you want a donation to those foundations.
Another question, I don't want to embarrass you, but how many hours do you and Annie have in on this project? Just personal time?
Probably about 15 minutes.
2 or 3? I just want to thank you both for all you've done, because these gals just get in the boat and go, and it's really been marvelous. But that's all right. Hey, we don't judge.
Everyone's going to want to have
We don't judge.
I do have one thing to add, though. We are looking for volunteers. We need boat drivers, and we also need people.
Pontoon boat drivers.
Yes.
Sober pontoon boat drivers?
If you don't mind, that would probably be preferable. So we need volunteers to drive boats for the tour. We also need volunteers to be at each house. We want people to help load and unload the boats, and someone to be in the home to make sure there's no shenanigans. So if anybody's willing to volunteer, see either one of us.
Yes, and also we're doing a silent auction.
She did not.
So if you'd like to donate something to the silent auction to raise money for the foundations, that would be awesome. We would appreciate
Did
that.
you say what time that starts?
It's going to be from 2 to 6 p.m.
Thank you.
on September the 15th. And then we'll do the silent auction in here. So again, if you, as your district or individual, you have something you would love to donate about the completion of this. All those proceeds will go into the foundation.
Kathy and Maria will donate to Lake Arch. I
That would be great.
Trying to make sure that we're all agree on the same page.
Thank you, Kathy.
Thank you, Kathy.
Yes,
Thank you so much for opening up the discussion of the SLP and making what you want to do with that is such a positive energy.
Oh,
Well, I
yeah.
appreciate the comment. You know, we've come a long way, Dave, in terms of the behavior, and that's part of why I can do it again. I'm not going to do it all the time, but I think we've come around, and I'm very close. But we want you to understand what we're talking about. I mean, that's all our goal, is to make sure you know what we're
Oh, so it's
doing.
12 p.m. yeah.
All right, if
Hang
that,
on one second, Madam Chair. September 15th, there is an IU game, IU versus Ball State.
we talked
Okay.
about this, yeah.
Yeah, we talked about that. Okay.
Well, we had, you
Oh.
weren't there, sorry, but it was discussed. It was
Well,
discussed.
even the people that are having the tour could be alumni, and
Yeah.
they don't usually miss a game, so that's
Are
why.
you set on the time? I mean, it seems like it would be a little cooler if you maybe did it a little later, more anyway, think about it, then
But you
maybe you
never know the
wouldn't
time.
have such a conflict.
Never know the time of the games,
I
though.
think one
It's
of
at
our-
noon.
One of our
Oh, is it?
discussions was
It's at noon.
the boat tour will go in increments. So you can be scheduled you to start at 2, some will be scheduled to start at 2:30. So even if you don't get here till 5,
Yeah.
there will still be slots available for the.
Well, it's a noon game. I mean,
I'm glad you know
A
that.
lot of free games really well.
Well, we
so
buy
we
tickets.
could donate a lot of money for our sign on, right?
Sometimes it's late. Okay, if that ends public comment, I would like to announce new business as our next meeting, which will be the final of the summer meetings, August 18th, right back here at 10 o'clock. Once again, no lunch, no free lunch, sorry. Please come join us, and if there's no other comment, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Oh, moved. How about a second? Second. Moved and seconded that we adjourn. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Thank you for coming. Aye. Done.
I just, I think, I want to make sure that, when you, okay. I just want to make sure that you say that this is going to be completed.